So look, if you want to grow your wealth, your income, and increase the amount of time off, then these are the shortcuts that can help. Welcome to the Wealth Creation Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Dan Latto. So in this podcast, we're going to talk to you about the fact that we have got to number 300. Can you believe that? And so I was like, what am I going to call this one? And then I was like, I know, 300. What does that remind me of? And then I went to the We Are Sparta, you know, where you spit over the person that you're speaking to, like he did in the film. If you've not watched the film 300, then you should watch it just for that bit. I forgot the guy's name that did it. But I was thinking about what it takes to get a podcast from zero to hero. It sounds like a 1980s film. He went from zero to hero. So how do you get a podcast from zero to hero? How do you get it from 0 to 300 in less than 60 seconds? Well, 60 months, possibly. And it's not easy, I'll tell you. It is very, very difficult. And it's difficult because a number of things. One is you've got to fit in time to fit in these, you know, we average about 20, 25 minutes now. But some of the times the podcasts were like, you know, an hour and a half. We're talking to an interviewee and we just keep going. Some podcasts, heck, we're like 2 hours. We had to split them in two. So, you know, it takes up an awful lot of time. And obviously right now we're doing a podcast every single day. And so sometimes we record 3 or 4 podcasts in one day just to try and catch up and keep the content coming out. And we can only record Monday through Friday. So the Saturday and Sunday, I have to make sure there are pre-recorded podcasts already lined up, ready to go. So that's the first bit of difficulty, is just getting the time spent to actually create the podcast. It takes an awful lot of time to just sit and physically record podcasts. The second thing that's quite difficult about getting to a 300 podcast mark is what the heck are you going to talk about for 300 different topics? And so that can prove to be very, very difficult. And so you have to tie it into sometimes what's happening in the real world. And there's a problem with that, which I'll go on to, because that's number 3. And then the other bit is you need it to be generic enough to give people inspiration and motivation, and it not to be framed within a certain time scale, which again, I'll talk about fairly soon. But for now, you've got to start having a list of topics. And so where do you get those topics from? And so that can be quite difficult. So you've got to, you know, go to chapters in books, see what other people are podcasting on, and then don't listen to the podcast. Just take the title and change it up a little bit, and then put your kind of mix onto it as well. And you just got to kind of mix it up a little bit. Obviously, there are only ever so many different things that you can talk about. But, you know, before you run out, and you know, something that you create might sound like something somebody else has created in terms of title and that kind of thing, but you have to give your own take on it. But then that leads us to number 3. And number 3 is, and so one of the problems that we have is that when you're creating podcasts, and so we've done them that have, say, for example, Brexit, when the Brexit vote first came through. Well, when we replay those, because we send these podcasts out, you know, at least once a day on a replay, and now we've got 300. I mean, we could literally send out a podcast replay every single day. We could even send 2 out every single day for the next 150 days, the next 5 months. And still, you know, it would still be fresh content for those people who never heard it. And that's one of the reasons why we do it. But then you re-release a Brexit podcast, well, it's completely out of date. Or, you know, like right now, for example, depending when you're listening to this, right now, Labour are on about cutting down all the private schools and everything being public. And I had a little rant on Facebook saying, well, you know, we should all wear the same clothes, all have the same haircut, all drive the same cars, all have the same aspirations, no self-employed, everybody should work in factories. And whilst that's relevant today, and obviously we could change the name of the country to North Korea, if that's what Mr. Corbyn wants, and let's go and do it completely and utterly properly. And Corbyn's income should be the UK average income of £23,000, whatever that income happens to be. Of course, Corbyn won't do that, despite his leftyism. And socialism is great, by the way, until you run out of other people's money. Love it. And you can keep taxing wealthy people as much as you like. And then when they move overseas, you're going to have to find another way of doing it. But anyway, the point I'm getting at before I go off on a rant on that is that you can't cover stuff that's time sensitive. So, we've done stuff with Theresa May, for example, and in 2 years' time, no one is going to remember who the hell Theresa May is. And if you're listening to this in 2 years' time, you're going, who the hell is Theresa May, for crying out loud? Exactly. Like, some people are listening to this podcast now. We're in end of September, and we're going, I don't know if Theresa May, the Prime Minister. Oh, yeah, completely forgot that she even existed. So that can cause a few problems when you're trying to record podcasts and trying to get to the 300 mark is, you recorded something on podcast 3, and 117 weeks later, you're putting it back out there. Nobody knows what you're talking about because that event that happened 107 weeks ago is out of everybody's mind. It was big at the time. Thomas Cook's just gone under. In 2 years, you'd be like, who the hell was Thomas Cook? Was that even a business? 167-year-old business, by the way, just went bust. 155,000 people or something, 190,000 people have to be repatriated, which I always find very funny as a word. It's like we're in war. It's the biggest repatriations in peacetime. It's like, no, people are just on holiday. I was stuck on holiday in Qatar, for goodness sake, with the volcano that went off in Iceland. Do you remember that? We had to spend an extra 2 weeks in Qatar. I missed my 4-year-old daughter's birthday. And I was looking at hiring cars and, literally driving back from Qatar and seeing if I could get home. The court orders in place and all sorts. But here we are. She's 14 now, 10 years later. My maths is dreadful. 10 years later, and it's, it was massive at the time, was that. And now it wasn't a massive thing. I should have just, chilled out and relaxed about it. If I could go back to family court, I would completely do it differently. I'd just tell them all to fuck off, basically. You do what you need to do. You're letting me know when you've done it, and then you come and let me see my kids. Because it made zero difference going to family court and having the ability to see my kids, because males in family court simply don't get access to kids. It's as, it doesn't matter who you are and what you do. It just simply doesn't matter. I've never really gone into that, and I'm not going to. But if you're in family court right now and you're a man, forget it. You ain't seeing your kids again. Just forget it. It's not happening. And this whole thing about, suicide prevention day, it's bollocks, complete bollocks. Anyway, we're on podcast 300. We are Sparta. So we're talking about everything that's happened since we started podcasting, and that's included in it. And if you think that's a bit negative, well, it is, because that's a reality. Wow, that took a dark turn. So let's get back on track. So podcast 300. So what are you going to do? Most people are listening to this and you've not got a podcast. You should have a podcast. Create a podcast. So what are we up to? That was number 3. Number 4 then is the benefits of having a podcast is that we can reutilize podcasts 1 through 299, and we can send them out, and we're going to do that again. And when we get to podcast 300, we go back to podcast 1 and we start sending them out on social media, because other people that are now looking, for help with what we do have never heard of that stuff before. So we have a new audiences come through all the time as well. So that makes a big, big difference too. So we get the opportunity to simply reuse that content and that data. And that's very, very powerful when you're trying to grow your marketing. But you can't do that unless you've actually got something to market in the first place. And so when we're creating these podcasts, these are assets for our business. The assets that we can use. Think about this. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket every single, time. I was going to say day, but it doesn't put it in every single day. But it's something that puts money in your pocket. A marketing asset is something that puts leads or attention. I love what Gary Vee says about attention. His job is to create attention, and then his marketing funnels basically do the rest. And my job is the same, is to create attention, to make people understand that we exist, that you can listen to me, you can watch me on YouTube, you can come and join me on Facebook, you can join the mastermind group, you can join a training course, we can do content for you, all that stuff. That's my job. And so not having a podcast, how on earth would people even know about me? I guarantee 75% of people that we've done business with have listened to the podcast. Now think about that. If we didn't have a podcast, that's 75% of all our income from business, not property, because that's irrelevant because it's tenants, but from the business would never have heard of us unless we had the podcast. And that's how powerful the podcasts are. And that's why we've continued and stuck with it up to podcast 300. Will we podcast till the day we die? I have no idea. Nowhere near there yet. hopefully, Tom, he's 95. But who knows? Maybe we'll just slow down a little bit. But there's always more people to help. There's always more people to inspire. There's always more people who want to listen, who need to listen to this stuff to get motivated and inspired and to challenge the way that they currently see the world. Because the way that you see the world right now is not the way the world is. It's merely as you see it. And the same for me. The way I see the world, I'm saying if you're in family court and you're a dad trying to get access to your kids, don't bother because it's never going to happen, is how I see the world, is not necessarily how the world is, because there are other dads who have got access to their kids for some bizarre reason I haven't. Judges yelling at you, telling you that you're selfish because you've applied to re-establish contact because mum hasn't allowed contact for 3 weeks, and literally yelling at you, saying that you're selfish because you want to see your children, is just an experience I wish on nobody, but is the way I see the world. I have very little respect for the police, social services, teachers, anybody in any kind of authority, Leeds City Council, judges, wankers, the lot of them. And so that is how I see the world, and that impacts how my decision-making process goes, but that's not necessarily how you should see the world. That is merely my experience of this particular aspect. And so how you see the world is merely that. It's not how the world actually is. But you can then put your imprint onto the world by creating podcasts, which is exactly what you should be doing, so that you can get to 300. And then someone comes through on the phone or on an email and says, I've just listened to podcast 4. Wow, that was amazing. And the leaflet dropping one, for example, or even podcast 1. I get it now. Cut my costs, increase my income, and invest the savings. That's what I should be doing to create wealth. Got it. Perfect. And then every podcast that follows from there is basically telling you how to do it. Like, we get people who are listening to podcast 1 again, and we know this because when we look at the stats, we can see how many people have downloaded podcast 1 this month. And we can look at last month and the month before and the month before. And so we know that this is having an impact on people. And this is your opportunity to create an impact as well. So if you've not got a podcast right now, you should definitely do it. And we'll have this same conversation on podcast 400 as well, I'm pretty sure. All right, until podcast 301, have a good day and we'll speak to you then. Take care.
Hey, it's Dan here. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Please click like or subscribe to the entire podcast.